Is AMD's RX 7900 XTX worth a purchase now, months after its release? And my answer to this would be yes, but not all RX 7900 XTXs are created equally. Where when I first tested this out around launch day, I was having issues where either the GPU would crash out of games, or I just had no real control in terms of properly undervolting the card or overclocking it. And also other YouTubers did do investigations. For instance, Debaura found that this model, the reference model, actually had issues with the heat pipes, and that caused the GPU to overheat in some of the GPUs that came through, at least on his test setup. However, going over to a custom model RX 7900 XTX, like the Phantom Gaming here from ASRock, I'm finding there's a few, we're going to go deep into this GPU here today because you can get this thing to run actually really well. Never pay full price for Windows 10 or 11 again. With today's video sponsor, SCD Keys, you can get activated for as little as $15 using that coupon BFTYC. Links in the description below. But first off, out of the box, I will say, since it is an OC model, the power consumption is actually extremely high. In fact, this model right here chews up more power from the wall, at least when I tested in Hogwarts Legacy, than an RTX 4090 did. However, it can undervolt extremely well, and the good news here is when I did undervolt it, at least on this model, it was running very stable. So it looks like the driver, but also the model, does have to do with your experience on a 7900 XTX. However, going more in depth into a comparison here between a custom model and the reference model, which I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to want to know more information about. Here's where out of the box, this OC model, you're really only getting an extra 23 megahertz. If I show you guys a static image versus a static image in Atomic Heart, for instance, at 4K, you can see here the megahertz on the memory is the same, but the GPU core clock's only slightly higher. However, it is using quite a bit more power than the reference model. Now, this is, I believe, is the problem with the reference model. Actually, a big problem with the reference model is it only has two 8-pin power connectors. And I thought this was the source of, say, the stability issues with the reference model. But for instance, when I was playing Atomic Heart with the reference model, the game would crash out randomly. As opposed to the OC model here from ASRock, I had no problems while I was doing all my testing and even gaming on it in, say, Dota 2, testing for stability. So I believe since this does have three 8-pin power connectors, it serves as just, I guess, a safety barrier for when the card needs to draw more amps and needs that. And if it doesn't have that, it can cause all sorts of issues, crashing being one of those. So I would automatically give that a win to the ASRock, where they've given the proper adequate feed for the GPU in certain applications when it needs to require more power. Though back to the undervolting, here's where I spent quite a bit of time checking out what is up with the RX 7900 XTX, and should you undervolt? And the answer is undoubtedly yes. There's a huge yes in the room here, not just because this place is Tech Yes City, but because the power consumption will go down from literally close to 500 watts down to 375 watts from the wall. Now, the implications of this is obviously much lower power consumption and also lower temperatures on your GPU. But I also found that the FPS, say for instance, Hogwarts Legacy, we went from 73 average FPS down to 70. Though we've also got another undervolting here, and that was a 2400 megahertz drop with 2700 megahertz memory, 10% power limit drop. And I saw this was giving us around the same FPS out of the box. And we were actually dropping the power consumption down considerably too. So if you're interested in undervolting this card, it gets a big thumbs up from me. And I would say don't be afraid to undervolt this thing heavily. Even though it says it goes to 3000 megahertz out of the box, I'm dropping this thing down to 2200 megahertz and getting extremely good results. So if you're interested in undervolting this card, you're going to get a lot of juice out of it, and it's going to serve you really well. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about here is comparing it to the RTX series cards out there at the moment, the 4070 Ti, the 4080, and the 4090. And here's where we'll go through a list of 4 different games at 3 different resolutions, 1080p, 1440p, and 4K, where, for instance, we'll show up the best result here for the AMD variant, and that is 4K on Atomic Heart. This is where it was coming close to RTX 4090 performance on the Atomic graphics settings. And then going out of 1440p and also 1080p, the RTX 4090 was starting to edge out the 7900 XTX. However, it was good to see that this was handily beating the RTX 4080 for pure rasterization performance, considering it is coming in at market price around $200 lower. However, with the 7900 XTX, it seems like there are some of these titles out there where it can get close to RTX 4090 performance. Also, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 being another one of those titles that we tested in the past. But here's where if we go over to Hogwarts Legacy, this is painting a different picture where the RTX 4090 is coming out well ahead. However, going to 1440p, it does start to become a little bit CPU bound, and then 1080p is pretty much purely CPU bound. Though onto the next title here, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This is where the RTX 4080 and 4090 do come out ahead at all three different resolutions. And then moving on to Fortnite, and I know a lot of you guys are going to say, Brian, Fortnite's old now. It actually did get a huge update with the Unreal Engine 5, which actually makes it, for instance, more strenuous on the GPU than games like, say, Atomic Heart, which is a 2023 new released game. So really shocked to see that how heavy this game can be on the GPU. And here's where the RTX 4090 and 4080 do score victories at all three different resolutions versus the RX 7900 XTX. So those gaming numbers that we took a look at there, that is pure rasterization performance. And if you're looking at ray tracing, for example, here's where the NVIDIA cards do start to perform actually quite a bit better than the RX 7900 XTX. So if you're going for pure rasterization performance, especially at 4K, and say you're going with an LG OLED 120 Hz, this is going to provide really good value, especially since the LG OLEDs are coming down a lot in price. Actually, I've seen them come for around 700 USD brand new. So if you're into getting the best out of the high-end experience with just pure rasterization, you don't want nothing to do with ray tracing, this is going to be a pretty good option for you, as well as the fact that this is coming in now under MSRP, even for a custom model like the Phantom Gaming OC. I saw this on Newegg, brand new for under $1,000. Though this is where it comes down to ultimately price versus performance. And is this model in particular going to give you an edge over, say, the reference model from AMD? And as we talked about before, I didn't have any stability issues on this Phantom Gaming model right here. So automatically, I'd give that a big win to the ASRock card. And in fact, I would say there's a lot of other custom models out there that have put in 3 8-pin power connectors, which that alone for me personally, as well as the fact that you're not risking getting a heat pipe issue, would be a reason to just go with a custom model over a reference model. However, there are some caveats to that. The first being this is a much bigger size than the reference model. I'll put the dimensions up on the screen with a comparison to the reference model. And also it does carry a different profile in terms of its temperatures. Since it is an OC model out of the box, it is going to get some mediocre performance in terms of its temperatures on the hotspot. The actual main temperatures on the GPU are actually really good, and in fact the fan profile out of the box was the best to go with in terms of balance of temperatures versus noise. Though if you decide to undervolt the card, this is where you are going to get much lower temperatures, which I do recommend. Now out there, before I review a card like this, I also like to check if other people are having issues with this particular model, so maybe I can replicate those issues. And I did go through some of the Newegg reviews, and I saw people were complaining about the temperatures of this 7900 XTX, but then the case configuration that they were putting it in looked like a sarcophagus. So if you are going with a graphics card like this, please do put it in a proper case with airflow. If you look at the from-the-wall power consumption figures, you're using up 500 watts. That's what's getting dumped into an area that's really small. You need extremely good airflow on these high-end graphics cards. Otherwise, they're just simply going to overheat, and that can severely shorten the life of the card, as well as cause stability issues. So if you are getting one of these cards, or if you're getting an RTX 4080 or a 4090 for that matter, do make sure you have extremely good case airflow, or just have an open test bed, which is what we've done with the testing here for the temperatures today. Now, in terms of the hotspot temperatures, they are mediocre. However, the noise and the main GPU temperatures are actually pretty good. So the final part of today's video is talking about the most important feature by far, and that is the RGB, where you're getting some RGB on the side and on the bottom of the card. And there's also an external 5-volt header on the card if you wish to control the RGB and hook that up to, say, your motherboard, which in this case, we've got an ASRock board that we're doing the testing on. You can go into the BIOS and just set the RGB from there. having to not install any RGB bloatware software. And then on the rear, you've got those 3 DisplayPort 2s, as well as the single HDMI 2.1 out. Which, if it's any critiquing point about this card, I would like to see 2 HDMI 2.1 outs on high-end GPUs going forward. So with all those details out of the way, it's time to go down to a conclusion now with the RX 7900 XTX, and more in particular, the Phantom Gaming OC edition here. Would I recommend it? And if so, who would I recommend it for? And the answer is, I think we've kind of hinted on that earlier in the video here. This is a card for someone who wants definitely better stability than the reference card, but also they want something that is going to be for mainly pure rasterization gaming. I'd say at either 1440p high refresh or 4K 120Hz, for instance. I wouldn't bother with this card at 1080p. As you can see in some of the games here, we're maxing out 1080p at maximum graphics settings. If you're going for competitive gaming, you're probably going to lower those settings, so you'd be better served with saving your money on the GPU in that manner, and that you're pretty much not going to get any extra gain, just maybe extra power consumption usage from the wall. However, for pure rasterization gaming from AMD, this thing does redeem itself, at least from the initial reviews that I did with the reference model. I think the undervolting can be pretty good. Just know that you would want to set in the right settings for that to work. Can be very finicky as well. I personally use MSI Afterburner now, knowing that it's giving me much better results than AMD's own software itself. And hopefully AMD sort of just lets that happen. So in a nutshell, the RX 7900 XTX Phantom Gaming OC from ASRock is a great implementation of the card. I do believe the 3 8-pin power connectors can fix some stability issues, especially the ones that I was having on the reference model. And also the 4K rasterization value on the high end is actually pretty good on this model, and it does undervolt quite well. So I have definitely got a lot better impressions coming into a custom model a few months after release than I did on day one. Day one, I just did not recommend the 7900 XTX to anyone. However, after testing this thing thoroughly, I am much more impressed with what AMD, and also in particular the board partners, are bringing to the table now. So it's kind of hard, isn't it? Like, if something gets ruined from day one, it's kind of hard to come back from that. Where I feel like perhaps this has done AMD. When they launched this card, it was a complete mess, to the point where I did not recommend it to anyone, pretty much. And so that damage, that lingers there, as opposed to them just waiting a couple of months or even a month and ironing out all the issues, whether it be drivers or mechanical issues, and then releasing just a rock solid card. I feel like that would have been much better for AMD, where at this point, prices are coming down, especially for the 7900 XT non-X, for instance. That's coming down a lot in price, where it's under MSRP by $100 in certain cases. This is now coming in around that MSRP price point for a custom model. So the value can be pretty good now, especially if you're a high-end rasterization gamer and don't want to turn on ray tracing and all those other fancy bells and whistles, but you really want to get high frame rates on your high-end monitor, for instance. This card's going to be able to do that and do it at a pretty good price. So I feel like the 7900 XTX can be a great option going forward. Just me personally, I would only get a custom model like the one that we have here and we took a look at here today. I would actually, unfortunately, ignore the reference model after spending not just time with it on day one, but spending time with it again months later, and it's still crashing out of games while I'm testing games. Anyhow, guys, hope you enjoyed today's review of the ASRock and the comparison between the reference model. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button. Also, if you have any questions or comments, be sure to drop a comment down below. Love reading your thoughts and opinions. As always, just like this question of the day here, which comes from KHoyMikizaran1037. And they ask, can you provide new links for Windows ISO that you make? The link is not dead. So they're referring to our Windows ISO video. We are going to make an updated video very soon. I've actually finished editing it. We're actually making the video now, and we're going to release that very soon. So do stay tuned. And when that drops, it'll be in your sub boxes if you are subscribed. If you're not subscribed, you can hit that sub button, ring that bell to get notified as soon as the Tech Yes videos drop. And with that aside, I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.